am Anna Seawold, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about personal development in the context of parenting, where I explore how you can find more calm, connection, and joy in parenting through the process of self-discovery and inner growth with a trauma-informed lens. I'm a parent educator, and my mission is to help children by helping parents. The motto of this podcast is raising our children, growing ourselves. Today, parental burnout, causes, signs, and how to cope with it. If parenting was stressful before the pandemic, during the COVID-19 global crisis, 2/3 of parents experienced some level of burnout. Yes, parental burnout is a real thing, and it's that perpetual physical and emotional over-exhaustion and that feeling of just, I need a break, and not really knowing when you are going to get that break. The mental health effects of parental burnout can affect your overall health. They can affect your relationship with your partner and your children and your parenting. In fact, a new report came out of the Ohio State University Office of the Chief Wellness Officer and College of Nursing that found that stress was simply too much for many working parents to handle, revealing that 2/3 of parents experienced some level of burnout. The study was conducted in 2021. It also found an association between burnout and increased depression, anxiety, and alcohol consumption. But wait, there is more. The study revealed that stress on parents also had consequences for children, as parental burnout was associated with punitive behavior towards their kids, including screaming, criticizing, and even physical harm, and increased acting out by their children. Wow. I firsthand experienced this in my work, and honestly, I wasn't shocked at all to read about the study and its findings. If you find yourself perpetually irritable all the time, annoyed with your kids, that you don't want to get up and do things, that you're exhausted and drained mentally, physically, and emotionally, you're not alone, and there are things that you can do to feel better. The pandemic is not over, and stress on parents is not going to magically go away as we emerge from the pandemic. And it is critical that we recognize and find ways to prevent burnout in parents. This is why I am having this conversation today with the researcher of this study, Kate Gawlik. She's an associate professor of clinical nursing at The Ohio State University and is board certified as a family nurse practitioner. She has extensive experience in family practice and population health with clinical interests in parental burnout and stress, child mental health and wellness, and preventative medicine. She's also the mother of 4 young children, and she really did talk about and share about her own experience during the pandemic. Kate and her colleagues developed a self-assessment tool to help parents recognize when they are becoming overwhelmed and are at risk for burnout. I asked Kate for permission to have that assessment, and you will have the link in your show notes. I hope you will find this conversation helpful, as it's packed not only with good information, but also lots of practical tools. And my wish for you is to never hit burnout. Before we get to today's conversation, I would like to recommend a few past episodes that I think you will enjoy. Episode 144, Mommy Burnout, How to Reclaim Your Life and Raise Healthier Children in the Process. So we have covered the topic of burnout in the past on this podcast, and this is a really great episode. In fact, parental burnout is not a new phenomenon. I recently found a book by the title Parental Burnout, published in 1983. I haven't read the book yet. I have ordered it, but I'm really curious to get my hands on this book because this is a topic that I'm strongly passionate about. And I am writing my own book about self-care, parental burnout, stress, overwhelm, and thriving as a parent. Another great episode is episode 143, How to Be a Happier Parent with KJ Dell'Antonia. Here is another great episode. Episode 281, The Power of Self-Regulation with my dear friend and colleague, Sarah McLaughlin, who used to co-host the podcast in the early years of the podcast with me. And this is jam-packed with amazing ideas, no cost, effective mind-body tools and strategies for you to feel self-regulated. I got so many compliments and great comments about this episode. So episode 281, The Power of Self-Regulation. Another great episode, one of my favorites, is episode 289, Mind-Body Tools to Develop Stress Resilience with Rebecca Ladine. This is a fantastic episode. Again, I got lots of comments on this episode. We talk about stress, overwhelm, how stress has a beginning, middle, and end, and how you can train your nervous system by learning how to cultivate stress resilience. And the last one that I would like to recommend is episode 270, Simple Tools to Feel Great with my favorite podcaster, Rangan Chatterjee. He's the host of the Feel Good, Live Better podcast. He was a dream guest for me, and I truly was looking forward to this conversation. But we recorded this conversation when I personally was going through a very low point in the pandemic. I almost canceled this interview, but I'm glad I didn't. And it's a really great episode, packed, super packed with lots of great ideas, suggestions, tools, and insights, how you can feel great, not only during the pandemic, but at any time. So I hope you will get to check my recommendations. And now, please enjoy my conversation with Kate Gawlik about parental burnout. Well, Kate, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. So I think I would love to begin by defining what parental burnout is and what is burnout in general, right? Mm-hmm. Mostly people associate this with job burnout, and that's not a medical condition per se, but I think everybody has a good idea what burnout is. If you're a parent, you definitely know, you have a sense what that means. So give us the definition.
Yeah. So I think in general, when we're talking about burnout, this is this chronic stress. And typically it's these feelings of energy depletion and exhaustion, and can be mental distancing and things like that. And usually, like you said, we see that around occupational or work. So we've heard that term a lot. And when you think and when we talk about parental burnout, this is again under that same umbrella, but it's specifically that chronic stress and exhaustion that occurs in our role as parents. And often when we're talking about burnout, we think about that the burnout actually overwhelms the parent's ability to then cope and function. So that is what makes it different from a normal parent stress, like we all get stressed. So really that defining quality between parental stress and burnout is that it overwhelms the parent's ability to cope.
And it's a pretty murky line, I would say, right?
Yeah.
When you're in burnout, you're in burnout. But how did you get there? That's what's kind of unpredictable. It's not like there are really good signs. When you're stressed, you're stressed. But it can be prolonged. Correct me if I'm wrong, that you don't have signs. Maybe you do, but you don't pay attention, and you're not going to say, oh, I'm hitting to burnout. Maybe I should do something about this. Can you talk about that threshold?
Yeah. And I think you hit on a really great point when you just said like the chronic part of it. So it's also looking at the chronicity, so I feel like as parents, we can have days where we feel burned out. I think we can have moments, where we feel burned out. But really the key where we're looking at kind of this really significant parental burnout is this chronic problem. So you're having more bad days with your kids than you are having good days. And you're having this mismatch between your perceived stressors and your available resources. And this in turn results in parents just feeling physically, mentally, emotionally exhausted. And often what comes with that then is detachment from their children. And that really is what distinguishes burnout from just kind of that parent stress that we all, feel at times.
Wow, this gave me like a punch in my gut when you said that, distancing from their kids. And, during the pandemic, parental burnout was on a rise, right? And, I continued working with parents, and I can clearly remember, a lot of families were struggling, but there was one particular family. Oh my gosh. They were just, I don't think even I was able to help them. I always felt that there's nothing I can do. Like I can have sessions with them. I can talk to the mom. I can talk to the dad. I can talk to the kid. I can talk to all of them at the same time. But they were not making progress because they were in burnout, like you said. And when you're in burnout, I mean, what do you do? And I wrote an article. The reason your report resonated with me so much was back in 2021, February of 2021. It was when I personally hit a really low point in the whole pandemic experience as a person, as a parent. I was really being burnt out by my work too. It was exhausting helping parents like that. And the worst part was parents would say to me, you don't know how we're struggling. We're going to send you videos. I'm like, please don't. I don't want to see. It's like you're telling us enough. But they would send me videos anyways. And you would see how they were hitting their children, hurting their children, pulling them over the stairs, and just the insanity that was happening in people's homes, and no one was talking about it. People were just saying that moms are burnt out, it's hard for parents, but no one was talking about the dark stuff that was happening in people's homes. And I wrote this article, and people gave me very poor, they said, this is too dark and negative. You can't publish this anywhere. I revised it because I was talking about what was happening in people's homes. That was the reality. People were using punitive techniques. People were burnt out. And it was just so heartbreaking to see that. And my inability to help those people because I myself was suffering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually that was one of the key findings in our study, was that parental burnout was strongly associated with those punitive parenting practices. So parents were more likely to be insulting, criticizing, screaming, cursing, physically harming their children, doing things like spanking. So we saw that in the parental burnout, with the population that had parental burnout, but we didn't really see it as much in those that were not burned out. So that was definitely something that was occurring, is occurring. And I think what's interesting is our study also took place during that time that you referred to, during January of 2021 to April 2021. And what's interesting is you don't think of that as like the height of the pandemic, right? We all associate that with March of 2020. But I think what happened with parents is we were just like in survival mode, like keeping in our mind that like this isn't going to last so long. And so then what happened is it did. and what we were seeing, I think, in that time frame was this: parents totally lost their sense of control. And when you lose control, or that sense of control, burnout can really set in, right? So we during that time. I remember my kids, my 4 kids, I never knew if they were going to be in school. They had been in, by that point, I think 4 different learning modes that year, ranging from being completely online school to being, 2 days in person to being 4 or 5 mornings, in person. Like it's just like this constant situation. And especially being a working parent, like you can't plan for anything, and I was taking meetings in my closet and, it was this intense period. And so the burnout, I think, especially during that time frame, was very real. I think it's still continuing during that time of 66% of parents. But I definitely think that if we redid this survey now, we'd probably see relatively high numbers, probably not that high, but still relatively high.
Yeah, people are coping a little better, I would say. At least I can judge from the clientele that I work with. And the struggling family that I mentioned, they are doing much better because their child was addicted to technology. The child would not come out of the basement, would not eat, would not sleep, and was just playing video games. And it's interesting that I was speaking at the conference October 2021, right after that, the thick of this, the burnout study of yours and my article. It was the first time in-person conference, and I was speaking. And of course, I was addressing a little bit of the burnout on what I observed. And I did mention about a few families. And then when the talk was over, one woman came to me and said, she recognized me, and she said that you helped the family that I was talking about, that she was their grandmother, that regardless of me feeling terrible that I didn't do anything, apparently, it was helpful at that time. So what was your personal experience during the pandemic? I mean, did you hit parental burnout yourself? I mean, with 4 kids.
Yeah. So March of 2020, I had, at that time, I had an 11-month-old, I had a 3-year-old, I had a 6-year-old, and I had an 8-year-old. And I was working full time. And I had kind of a unique experience in that when the whole lockdown happened, we were in Florida on vacation in my parents' condo. My parents were not there. And so we ended up staying in Florida for like basically 3 months. So I think in a way that kind of like saved my life. I think if I would have been in cold Ohio, like it would have looked a lot different, for us. But I would just say there were definite periods where I burned out. I mean, and I think, again, like you're so intensely invested in all of these roles. Like you want to be such a good mom, such a good parent. You want to do well at your job. You are trying so hard to keep your kids so they're not falling behind, but like we're not superhumans. And I found that what I had to start doing is just saying no to things. So that was, I think, how I controlled a lot of it, is I just kept saying, I don't have the capacity to do that right now. And luckily, a lot of that worked out. But I mean, there were definite times, especially when the kids were supposed to be in online school and I'm supposed to be working and my husband's working from home and we're all together. And then we have like, our preschooler that I don't even honestly remember what he was doing like during this time. And then we had the baby, like, I don't even remember what they were doing. Yeah. So I think, it's really ebbed and flowed, with me throughout this whole thing. But somehow, like, we've kept afloat, and I just keep hoping that, my kids will come out of it better. I mean, I try to focus too on the good things. Like, I think we got to do a lot of things that we would never have gotten to do if the pandemic hadn't occurred. And I do think it kind of kept, especially the older kids, younger. Like they weren't exposed to everybody as much in school and things like that, where they would learn certain things. So I definitely think that they are a little bit younger, and they kept some of that youth. But oh no, the burnout though is real.
So is the burnout still continuing now that we are out of that dark period, what are parents reporting? Or do you plan on doing another study?
So I don't know that I can necessarily say that for sure. I think the problem right now is that we still have a lot of lack of control. So I personally, what I'm finding and what I have found through, I would say the second half of this year is even though like the masks came off and everything, now my kids are just constantly sick. So, somebody is always home with me. I have very little control of who's home. And there's still a lot of like quarantine procedures, like a lot of the preschools still have things like that where, the kids are still home. And so I still feel like I'm lacking a lot of that control. But at this point, I think it's just so much better than it was that I can just be thankful for that. But I think the other thing that we're seeing and that we're going to continue to see going forward is that there are a lot of there's going to be a lot of deficits as far as, learning because they missed all that school. And then like the social emotional aspects with a lot of the kids too. And so another, key finding in the study was that parents that were burned out often reported then, certain behaviors in their children. And so I think that relationship is probably also like bidirectional. So if the child's struggling, then that causes the parent to have additional stress. But I also think if the parent's really burned out, then that kind of trickles down to the kids, right? So that relationship is likely, bidirectional. But the finding really was that parents who were burned out reported what we call internalizing, externalizing, and attention behaviors more often in their children. So an example of an externalizing behavior would be like fighting with other kids, acting out, not obeying the rules. Internalizing would be, they're worried a lot, sad, depressed. And then attention behaviors would be more like trouble concentrating and things of that nature. So we definitely also saw that relationship, with parental burnout.
Very, very interesting. So, what made you do the study in the first place? What was that conversation with your colleague like, or how did you decide to do it? I'm curious. Is there a story or a conversation?
Yeah, it was actually with my husband where, I think we were preparing dinner one night and everybody was like running around playing tag or like being crazy. And I remember him looking at me and he was like, "Can you believe that we do this every day?" And I don't know why, but that just like hit me like, like it was like a sucker punch, where I was like, no, like I really can't believe that we do this every day. And then he was like, and that was just one day. And it was just such a validating moment for me that like, this is really hard, and I was like, if I'm feeling like this, like I can't be the only one feeling like this. And so that really, was where I got the idea to then do the study. And so, that was more or less the catalyst was my own experience.
I see. What were the questions in the study, in the survey? Can you read them? I'm curious. Maybe the listener can follow along and answer for themselves.
Yeah.
And I will think of the answers myself too, if it's applicable.
So the whole survey that we did was very extensive. So it looked, a lot of things like demographics. And then it also looked at, there were other scales in there like depression scales, anxiety scales. It also looked at like things like punitive parenting practices. So the survey was very extensive, but what we did was also include the parental burnout survey. And so that I can kind of go through, but I think I could also give your listeners access to the scale and they can kind of rate themselves because it's on a continuum. So you could be feeling mild burnout, you could be feeling severe burnout, and it just kind of depends. But I'll just give you some examples of things that are on the scales. So like I wake up exhausted at the thought of another day with my children. Some of the questions are flipped. So meaning we just do that when we do a scale to make sure that somebody's not going through and just checking all the boxes. So it's kind of like a self-check. But I find joy in parenting my children. So that one would be a a flipped one.
Sorry, I gotta laugh. I think I don't know, even without the pandemic, anybody can 100% say that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So another example would be like, I feel like I'm in survival mode as a parent. I lose my temper easily with my children. I feel overwhelmed trying to balance my job and parenting responsibilities. So our scale too was very specific to working parents because we felt like that was who was really affected, especially during that time in the pandemic. And again, it was kind of speaking to my experience as well.
Yeah, that's what I want to ask you about. Who was suffering the most during the pandemic? From my experience, I could say that in terms of kids, if you look at the spectrum, right? Toddlers, preschoolers, middle childhood. I think middle schoolers and high schoolers had it the worst. Like younger kids, preschoolers and toddlers, I think they were fine. They didn't have significant, and this is based on my observations in my neighborhood, talking to people and in my community, and my own experience, right, with the middle schooler. And so what can you say, who suffered the most, if that's possible to answer that question?
So we didn't specifically look at that with the children, but I can definitely tell you as far as parents, what the risk factors were, the strongly associated risk factors for having parental burnout. So being female, you were more likely to be burned out. The number of children living in the home, so specifically those homes that had over 2 children. If the parent had a diagnosis of anxiety, if their children had a diagnosis of either anxiety or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And then interestingly enough, the strongest association was actually when the parents were concerned that their children may have an undiagnosed mental health disorder, but it wasn't yet diagnosed. So
I saw that a lot. Yeah, that came up a lot. And yeah, over and over it would come up. Yeah. And a lot of people actually sought out mental health diagnosis for their children for the first time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was really associated with parental burnout. And I think it's that not knowing and that lack of, feeling like there isn't control, that a lot of those things do cause burnout in parents.
Pretty interesting. And did your survey was done on males too, on dads too,
Yes.
or primarily women?
No, it was, I think, I don't know the exact what the breakdown was. More females did take the survey, but we definitely had a good number of males that took it as well.
And they were burnt out too? They were reporting being burnt out?
Yeah, their numbers were also burned out. But as far as gender goes, males, I think, reported around 41 or 42%, 42%, and then females were at 68%.
So what are those numbers telling you? As a
well,
scientist?
I don't know. I mean, just being a mother, I think you carry a lot of what I think of as like this invisible backpack, right? So you are oftentimes more of the emotional support for everybody, and you're kind of the one that keeps it all together. And not only that, when you're thinking about where we were in the state of the pandemic, you were also the teacher. You were also the one cleaning and cooking the meals and providing childcare if you had younger children. Obviously the dads do some of that, but oftentimes that falls onto the mom. And the other thing that we saw during the pandemic was just many women quit their jobs because they had to. So, that wasn't research that we conducted, but, it's out there. So, and many women were much less productive than their male counterparts.
And also, based on your study, you discovered that alcohol consumption went high, right?
Yes. Yeah. That's another thing that we found is that parents, especially parents who were burned out, tended to have an increase in their alcohol consumption versus pre-pandemic.
I mean, and just it's like a temporary relief but the consequences of the alcohol is just you get excited for 30 minutes, but then the low goes lower than your starting low point. So you start feeling anxious and depressed more than before you started drinking. It's just, terrible loop. I think that's an interesting finding. Did you know that since March 2020, I have been offering free support calls for the members of the Authentic Parenting community? Currently, we are on a bi-monthly schedule. Yes, twice a month, we get together via Zoom and talk about basically everything. In the past 2+ years, we have covered marriage, relationships, sex, parenting, boundaries, self-care, and so much more. I usually post about the calls in my Facebook group and send regular alerts to my mailing list. If you have never heard of those calls, well, now you have. If you always wanted to join but felt hesitant, you gotta try. And if you are a regular participant, know that you have a special place in my heart and I love you. We have become so close with the core members that it truly is special. We're still going strong, and if you need ongoing or irregular support, join us. There's no obligation, no registration, and for sure, no hidden costs or agenda. In fact, I am asked all the time by colleagues whether I'm doing these calls out of the goodness of my heart. And the answer is yes, which surprises people. And they always are quick to offer me advice to charge people for those calls. I am not going to charge people for the support calls for several reasons. Number one, for example, I strongly believe that social emotional support is vital for parents and it should be available. And number two, giving, generosity, service are strong core values for me. I get benefits from these calls too. In fact, the reason I started them so early in the pandemic was to provide support for my community and for myself. I knew that by helping others will help me get out of my own drama, stuckness, and give me a sense of purpose, meaning, and help me deal with the crisis better. I was right. It was life-changing. As I said, I post about the calls in my Facebook group, the Authentic Parenting community, and send regular weekly alerts to my mailing list. If you're not in the Facebook group or on my mailing list, you are welcome to join. And if you are in the group and on the mailing list, but somehow miss the information about the calls, please turn on your notifications or get in touch with me. I hope to see you on one of our upcoming calls. You can hear what the support calls meant for the participants in this short 8-minute audio clip that I pulled from one of the episodes. Please enjoy. I asked the core group of people to send me a short audio about the support calls, and I want to play them for you.
Anna, this is Julie from Chicago, and I just wanted to thank you so much for the private group sessions that we've been having since the pandemic started. I love the group so much. It's amazing talking to people from across the world, actually. There's single people, married people, divorced people. We're all different, but we all have the same struggles, and being on these calls have made me feel not so alone. Since the pandemic started, I've been unemployed, home with the kids. My husband's working from home. I feel like I'm being forced to deal with my childhood traumas now. It's all coming out, and I feel like I was spiraling out of control. Being on these calls, I found so much support in my marriage, support in my parenting, support of me as an individual and loving myself. I've gotten amazing book recommendations. I've gotten amazing recommendations and tips from fellow parents, as well as you, Anna. You have become a great friend to me, and I talk about you all the time to all of my friends. I just cannot thank you enough for having these calls weekly. I'm not going to lie, I don't always want to get on the call because I think I don't always want to face things. It's just a struggle. But then once I'm on the call and I see the other people and they're so supportive and don't make me feel bad for having all these emotions and thoughts and feelings. It's truly such a supportive community, and I could not be more grateful. Thank you for everything, and I hope that we continue these calls. Take care. Bye.
Hey, I found the support group something to look forward to in my week, and I enjoyed being able to have a space to discuss my week and listen in on others. I really enjoyed the fact that it was a core group, the same people joining week to week. We had some laughter as well, which was great. I appreciated that. I really felt like the group was there for me when things got a little rough, and I appreciated they held me for a bit and really was able to listen to me, hear me out. And I really appreciated Anna being silly at times. Thanks again, Anna. Thank you. Authentic Parenting.
So the support calls during the pandemic have been amazing for a number of reasons for me and by extension my son. Number one, to be able to sit with a group of individuals where we just had a space to just socialize and communicate, and then organically have our parenting challenges present themselves just through dialogue and discussion. And then to be able to experience the camaraderie by being able to identify with each individual's challenges has been monumental in the sense that I never felt alone. I feel the support, I feel the bond, I feel the family. And then getting the solutions in some ways to be a better parent has been rewarding in and of itself. So I'm completely and totally satisfied and grateful to be a part of this community. And it's been rewarding, like I said, in so many ways. So I'm extremely grateful to Anna and all of the other parents who have continued to show up and be a part of this support call community.
The support calls allowed parents the opportunity to virtually give and ask for help with parenting dilemmas. It facilitated connection during a time when many people felt isolated. The calls created a safe space to candidly discuss situations, explore the roots of the issues, and ways to improve going forward. A gift those families will benefit from indefinitely.
Hi, Anna. This is Zara. I just wanted to say thank you so much for your support calls during this pandemic times. I wanted to thank you for introducing us to each other, and I met such a wonderful people, and I met new friends, and I got such new advices and more opportunities to expand my parent skills and get more support from them. And I know that in critical situations where I really need help and support, I know that I can text and call any one of you guys, like you, Anna, Julie, Justin, Colleen, Matu, all of you guys, Jessica, and have all of your support and understanding. And I just want to say that I really appreciate what you're doing with this community, and I'm really happy to be part of this. And I want to say that I'm very grateful to know all of you. And thank you so much for all your hard work, and you're amazing. And thank you to all people who've been with me and who listened to all my craziness and supported me. And I hope I did the same to them. And I hope to see you in the next parenting support call. And happy autumn. Bye.
I was so excited and honestly a little nervous when I stumbled upon the post on Facebook about the parent support calls. Anna and the other parents made me feel so welcome. They were kind, supportive, and offered valuable feedback. I began participating in the calls as often as my schedule allowed. The calls are part of my self-care routine and have been invaluable. I thoroughly enjoy hearing comments from people who are so insightful. I appreciate that there are also times that we laugh. I am so incredibly thankful for Anna organizing and facilitating these calls. She is as amazing, if not more amazing, as she is on her podcasts.
Hey, Anna, it's Ranella. Thank you so much for doing the support calls during the pandemic. I have been so grateful that I was able to connect with so many people, so many other parents or human beings during this pandemic, because it felt so isolating, and having you guys on video or having you guys on audio just lifted my spirits every time I joined. So thank you so much for doing that service from the bottom of your heart, from the goodness of your heart. You've just been an amazing person to know all these years. I really appreciate you. Thank you.
And now let's get back to my conversation with Kate. What other findings, surprising or non-surprising, just generally, share with us?
Well, I mean, I think really so thinking about this from more of an optimistic standpoint too, I think really when we look at parental burnout, the things that parents can really do to kind of help themselves and mitigate this really is rooted in one, identifying it, so identifying that it's present, and two, that if they're not yet really in that moderate to severe burnout range, that they're focusing on prevention, so really being kind to themselves, practicing self-care, which I can't emphasize enough. I mean, I know everybody says that, but as a parent, I just know how I feel if I don't get any sleep and how much more irritable I am versus if I've had a good night's sleep, right? I mean, there's a reason why they use sleep deprivation as
torture.
A way to, yes, but it's true. And I every time I say that and I think about that, I always think about sometimes it's just inevitable for parents. I'm still dealing with that with my 3-year-old, or when my kids have been sick for a month, everybody's up at night, so it's really hard for parents to be like, oh yeah, in theory, that's nice that go get a good night's sleep, but that's just not always possible. So it's just really about doing what you can. I mean, we can get outside every day with our kids, right? We can go on walks with them and get exercise. We can control things like nutrition, which helps everybody's mood and kind of helps everything in general. So, controlling the things that can be controlled, and then really connecting, I think, with other parents, that can be so helpful, right? Is just having conversations with people that are dealing with the same things that you're dealing with. That in itself is so therapeutic. And then if you are feeling like you're more in that moderate or severe range, then being proactive. So kind of evaluating, we talk a lot about, looking at your stressors and looking at your resources and really trying, and this will be individualized, this will be different for every parent, but really looking to decrease your stressors and then increase your available resources. So just an example of that would be, for kids that, or for parents that have maybe elementary school, middle school age, is it decreasing some of the after school activities? That's an easy way to decrease a stressor, right? And then, increasing resources would be maybe carpooling. So you're not feeling like all you're doing is being in the car, so that's just one way, when you're kind of looking at that scale. But And then obviously, if you're in that severe or even in the moderate range, just, asking for help. So connecting with a healthcare provider, a mental health professional, and letting people know that you are struggling and you need help. And that's okay.
What does it take to come out of the burnout, do you think? And how long it will take? I mean, obviously it's very individualist and things like that, but just to give the listeners some hope that, if you're burnt out, it takes some time, talk to someone, talk to a mental health professional and things like that. But how long this is going to last, right? That would be a very normal question someone may ask.
Yeah. And it's such a good question. And I think the biggest thing to emphasize too is just knowing that you're not alone in this. Like, so many parents are feeling it. And, we all love our kids and we all, are doing the best that we can. And I think that's important to remember that. And so I guess a couple things is that, again, recognizing that's what it is. And then you ask any parent, like I just said, like sit down and, look at your stressors, look at your resources. And they're like, I don't have time. Like, I don't have time to do anything. But I guess, to kind of really be a bit, very honest, like if you keep doing what you're doing and expect different results, you're not going to get them. You have to do something to change if you want different results. So again, kind of looking at that. And then I think the other thing that's just really important is just to acknowledge that hopefully these are just bad days. These are just bad moments, but like, it's not always going to be this way. It's not always going to be this hard, and even like myself, I use this example, like when I have a child that's like crying and like screaming, how I get through that is I just have to tell myself, sometimes 10 times, they can't cry forever. And so that's how I kind of think of like with burnout, is that like, it's not always going to be like that, so you just have to kind of just work through those things that we just talked about and just remember that long term, it's not going to always be like this. So, and I also, I think it's important to like go back to the very basic things as far as like feeling grateful. Like when you're burned out, it can be really, really hard to get caught in this loop of like, oh, I'm so frustrated with my kids. I'm so frustrated with my life and the way it is right now. And so like, if we can reframe situations, like, so instead of being like, my child is having a tantrum because they're trying to like push me over the edge, and just simply saying to yourself and reframing it, like, my child is having a tantrum because they need something. And even like if it's a tantrum because you cut their sandwich the wrong way, like that's very real to them. And so just trying to make those like minor adjustments, even in the way that you're thinking about the situation, or, like to just really try to put yourself in your child's shoes, or like to see things through their eyes for a minute, I think can also be very powerful. Like just to kind of, again, reset and be like, they're still little, or they're still, they still are not at that cognitive level where they can understand or conceptualize that what they're saying or doing is not rational. But so I think all these little things and those little tweaks can be important. But again, I totally understand, like when you're in the moment, it's not always possible, but just sometimes it is possible. So taking those opportunities when you have the chance.
I love the idea of reframing when it comes to, children's behavior or whatever you're going through. Just as I think we need those reminders, those reframing moments to orient us. If you're seeing, because your mind has so much power, right? If you say, this will end, or my child needs something, the example that you gave, or, this is not going to last forever, or this is just a day I'm having. Sometimes I remind myself, I say, oh my gosh, I can't wait until this day is over. And tomorrow is going to be a different day. Or sometimes I would say, what can I enjoy about this? If it's an unpleasant, pesky task or a chore or, something that I don't want to face, I think reframing is powerful. It's not that you're deceiving yourself. You're placating your mind and you're saying, it's not a catastrophe. Mind, it's not a catastrophe. This is not an emergency. I got this. I reframed it and I'm in charge and I have power. I'm empowered. I think there's so much power in that. But when you feel stressed out, burnt out, I think one of the things that goes out is your ability to be resourceful, creative thinker, right? Critical thinker. You catastrophize, everything is a disaster, even seemingly small things are like gigantic threats. I think that's the problem. When you're in that zone, you can't come up with creative ideas or solutions or resourceful ideas in the moment. So maybe having when you have the resources, when you're in a different state, practice reframing just as a way of living your life. Don't wait for those emergency moments to learn something. You have to practice those skills outside of the moment, so that when the moment is there, you have the skills. I think that's what I preach a lot.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important point.
If you can reframe throughout the day, right? So many things happen. You don't have to wait for the disastrous day to reframe it. It won't work because your brain doesn't have the power to access the thinking abilities or creative thinking abilities.
Yeah. And I guess maybe it was about a year ago. I remember my 2-year-old and my, at the time, 4-year-old, we were getting ready to go somewhere and it was raining. And I remember trying to rush everybody out to the car so they don't get all wet, and then, I have to go change their clothes and all this stuff. And something happened where I had to go back in, and I came out and they were soaking wet, and I think if I would have been in the mindset of burnout, I would have been oh, this is so mad. I'm so mad. I'm so irritated. Now I have to go do all this stuff and everything. And then but I took a moment to actually see the joy this was giving them. They had never been outside in the rain before. And it was this, I don't know. And all it was just me being able to see that. And then it totally changed. Then I just let him play, so I think when you're in burnout, I could have gotten mad, but just kind of again, refocusing it, seeing it from their eyes, you can actually really see these beautiful things. And so that's why, again, giving yourself those tools and those resources prior to when you're in the middle of a screaming child, I can't do this, that it is really important.
Yeah. I teach a class called How to Be a Calm Parent. And this is exactly, the tools one of the things that I talk about is, I give an example of Michael Phelps and the Olympics. Michael Phelps doesn't get up the day of the Olympics and go to the Olympics and swim and win, right? He practices years and years and years for that one race. So it's the same thinking applies to parenting. You, in fact, need to practice the gratitude, the mindfulness, the reframing, the breathing, all of those good things that are going to serve you in the moment. You actually need to practice before the moment rises. So that's a second nature. That's a habit. You can reframe. You can look at the bright side of things. You can turn complaints into, gratitude thoughts, and on and on. I think that's the biggest secret, if we were to frame it as a secret. There is no other way. When you are in the thick of it, when you are shouting at your kid or in burnout or experiencing a difficult moment, it's hard to, I learned this on a podcast. I read this in a book. It's not going to come naturally to you. So you have to practice this during calm moments, including, I was thinking about this, and you have 4 kids. This may apply to you very well now. Taking a break for yourself as a mom, when you're not in a crazy emotional moment, but when you're calm with your kids, teaching them that mommy needs to take a break sometimes. And when you are in a calm moment, when there's no shouting, yelling, and there's no tension, kids are playing nicely and you're happy, just training them that mommy sometimes needs to take a 5-minute break, I think is also a good tool for the future when you need to take a break, because your child will know and expect that that's what happens. That's a natural thing, as opposed to like you're frantic, hectic, you threw the towel on like, mommy needs a break. And you go into a room like that doesn't look so nice, so good. You don't feel good. And it's a teachable moment for your kids. They're watching you, how you take a break when you're burnt out and you're resentful and angry and it's their fault. No, but if you practice taking a break just as a practice throughout the day, throughout the week, when the time rises, you can just say, mommy is going to take a break. You don't have to be in that state. It's just an additional teaching I want to squeeze in for my listeners. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I do. I think that's great.
Sorry, I derailed you completely from the conversation.
Oh no, I've enjoyed all of it.
But so, do you have anything to say yourself to any of the points?
Well, I guess one last thing as we're on that point of, being in the middle of it, practicing those tools, so later you can pull those out when needed. I think another thing that as parents we often do not do is like when our kid is in the middle of like a tantrum or something like that, it gets really easy to like take it up, right? And then the minute you take it up, they take it up. So I don't know, but I had once heard something along the lines of like, you can offer this moment as like the moment of where they see you get mad, or you can do it as like a moment of connection for them. And so maybe not right in the middle of a tantrum is like this moment where you're going to like try to connect. But I've definitely found with every kid, I feel like it's gotten better, where every single time I feel like somebody's starting to lose it or get out of control, I try to look at it as this is my opportunity to connect. Like, because when they're in that state, and we all know because we've all been in that state too, your brain doesn't work. And I remember it was my second child at some point telling me, he said, when I'm mad, my brain feels rotten. And I've always remembered that because I'm like, I totally like, that's such a great way for a kid to frame something, because it is they can't think, like and they've shown that even like with MRIs, the parts of their brain that's emotional light up. They have no executive functioning in their frontal lobe during those times. And so you can't expect them to be making those decisions when their brain isn't even working the way that it would normally work. And so using those opportunities to provide connection and safety for them versus like, because they're already feeling so out of control. So anyway, that was just something I thought of as you were talking to.
No, definitely. Yeah, that's what we teach on the podcast. And I think safety is the number one, because your child already feels out of control. And just like the mom in burnout, that everything seems, even perceived threats seem bigger than they are. Kids feel the same way. You as a parent become a source of threat, even though you might be saying, come on, you got to put your shoes on. We're going to the grocery store. But if your child is out of control, they're going to see you as a big bear, as a tiger, as a lion that is about to swallow them alive. And they're going to respond to that. And unfortunately, again, it comes down to that point of reframing and knowing this information developmentally, that this is what they're going through, right? Understanding what they're going through and reframing so that you won't yell and scream and push and cajole and resort to punitive parenting techniques that it can completely blow the picture out of proportion and things escalate. I mean, we've all been there, we've all done that, but a lot of the things could be preventable if the parent doesn't take it personally. But if the parent is burnt out or stressed out, that's a personal threat to you too when your kid is not listening. So knowing that if you're taking your minor everyday toddler, preschooler children's things too personally and reacting catastrophically, it's a sign that you are stressed out, that you don't have inner resources enough to the stressors of the life, that everything is a big, gigantic danger and threat and harm that you see.
Yes, so much so.
Yes. Okay. So in conclusion, how can one understand that they are hitting burnout? I don't want any parent to be in burnout. I love the idea of prevention. That's where I stand for. I want to help parents. So help us with that. What are the signs that we're getting there?
Yeah. So you can, like I referred to that scale, you can take that. I know that's not always feasible, but we can make sure you get linked to that site.
And
where
thank
you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I'll put that in in the show notes, but also maybe as a resource on my website if you would give permission.
Yes, for sure.
Okay.
And so I think the other things, just signs that you're starting to kind of burn out is just, how are you feeling with your kids? Are you starting to not want to be with them? Do you find that you're overly irritable? Are you having more bad days than good? Do you wake up so exhausted in the morning that you don't want to be with them? And again, this is on a continuum. So I think to some degree that can be normal to feel that way certain days, certain moments. And I think that's pretty normal. It's the chronicity of it. So is this every single day, day in and day out, and you're just feeling like you're not the parent that you want to be, and you're emotionally detaching from your children, that's really when you need to kind of seek out help and to provide different strategies and to look and refocus your energy on finding those resources and decreasing those stressors.
Amen. And for the listener who is in burnout, we're offering a solo trip. No, we're not offering any trips. That would be nice. If you're tired of your kids, if you don't want to be a parent anymore, you can go on a solo trip to Hawaii. No, you
be
can't.
Amazing.
That's a dream, ladies and gentlemen. That's a dream,
That's funny.
It's like, sometimes you do feel like that. It's like even the sweet voice of your child that you absolutely adore, it becomes like a shut up. You don't want to hear. It's like you are so spread, so thin. You're so done. It's like everything. I can definitely feel that. I don't feel like that, because I do practice what I call radical self-care and all of that. But definitely in the pandemic, I have felt that even the slightest demand, it becomes like this arduous task. If somebody is asking you to climb like a gigantic mountain, it feels like that. And you're like, no, why should I do it? I don't want to do it, and you just want to resign from your parenting role. But sorry, we can't help you with that. This has been a pleasure. This is my favorite topic. I am very passionate about helping parents with this, and I hope we can stay in touch. And I want to know what you're up to, what you do, what kind of new studies, surveys you conduct. I'm interested in this. So thank you for sharing all of this and some of your personal stories.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me. I hope, parents out there understand they're not alone in this, and that there, are things that you can do to help. So thank you so much for having me.
That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you enjoyed it. Did this conversation resonate with you? What's your biggest takeaway? Did you find it useful? Are you in burnout currently? You can take the self-assessment tool to help you recognize when you are becoming overwhelmed and are at risk for burnout. Also, you can join our support group. As always, I love hearing from you. If you have a comment, question, a feedback about the podcast, about this episode, or in general, please get in touch. You can send me a note to the email info@authenticparenting.com. You can call the number 732-763-2576 and leave a voicemail. And for international listeners, there is a free tool on the contact page of my website. It's called SpeakPipe. Go to authenticparenting.com/contact and send me a message today. If you haven't already, be sure to rate the podcast on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify and write a brief review on Apple Podcasts and share why you love the show. And if you feel compelled to support the show, please consider becoming a patron on patreon.com. With a small monthly contribution, you can express your thanks, your gratitude, and your love for the Authentic Parenting podcast. Go to patreon.com/authentic parenting and join our 22 active patrons who together contribute $136 towards our monthly goal of $500. The number of patrons has been growing, and I am grateful beyond words. You can find the show and follow it wherever podcasts are played, because I'm assuming you don't want to miss new episodes. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and elsewhere. And if you want to see behind the scenes of podcasting, get some cool content about parenting, personal development, and a glimpse into my private life, follow me on Instagram. My handle is Authentic Parenting Podcast. Until next week, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. I am Anna Seewald. Thank you so much for listening.